All right, this is News Compass. The short SMS code is 40920 and the hashtag on Twitter is News Compass. So it's all about the ICJ, the disputed waters between Mogadishu and Nairobi. And this week, last week the minister issued a presser where she said that Kenya opts for an out-of-court settlement as the ICJ, of course, pushed the hearing dates to November the 4th and 9th. But before we get to the nitty-gritty of the discussion, here's what CS Dr. Ambassador Monica Juma did say.
In 2009, those of you who will remember, Nairobi and Mogadishu signed a memorandum of understanding that preferred the settlement of the maritime dispute, if it ever arose, by the use of a negotiated approach. And we hope that our sisterly country will be amenable and cooperative in this endeavor. In our view, it would be irresponsible on the part of any of us not to take all measures that insulate us from any further vulnerabilities in already a very fragile environment.
All right, welcome back. Professor Monene, first to you. Of course, you have extensively written about this topic in the standard column of yours, and equally, what's at stake here, what's at the fulcrum point, is about power, status, and above all, sovereignty. Has this so far standoff, the maritime dispute between Mogadishu and Nairobi, degraded the gains made against Al-Shabaab, to be specific, in Somalia?
Oh, it has effect on Al-Shabaab's ability to maneuver itself.
Mm-hmm. Effect, positive, negative?
Negative effect. When the two countries are not able to concentrate on dealing with the terrorists because they are squabbling over something else, then that gives leeway to the terrorists to feel free to maneuver. So it's not been very good for the region, for the two countries, when we have this sort of preoccupation as opposed to figuring out how to cooperate more in economic challenges, commercial challenges that can be dealt with. So there is that that needs to be looked into.
Yes. 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 From where you sit, Andrew Franklin, perspectively then, give us the outlook in terms of the gains, politically and security-wise, that Monica Juma has issued the press. Of course, her statement is Kenya's position, now opting for an out-of-court settlement. At the same time, adjacent to that is the court now extending or postponing the hearing dates from September to November 4th and 9th. Does it look like perhaps a gateway for diplomatic approach, which initially was missing between Mogadishu and Nairobi, to sit down and have that diplomatic approach to resolve the maritime dispute?
Well, despite coming some 5 or 6 years too late, the CS for Foreign Affairs, you have to support what she said. Everything she said is absolutely correct, despite the fact that it should have come 5 or 6 years ago, and that some experts, some people who believe that Al-Shabaab poses an existential threat to not just Mogadishu, but also to the security of Kenya as well, and other areas that are marginal in the Horn of Africa, would prefer that the governments, the legally constituted sovereign governments, would focus on countering and defeating Al-Shabaab insurgency, whether in Somalia or within the 5 frontline counties of Kenya. So I believe that the ICJ did, in fact, accept Kenya's request to change its defense team at the last minute, to give the two parties, the two states, the two governments, the opportunity, perhaps, to establish some sort of negotiations, which ideally would lead to a joint economic commission to exploit not merely the triangle, the disputed triangle, but also much of the blue economy, the maritime zones. After all, Kenya has the largest navy on the Indian Ocean outside of South Africa. Mogadishu has not had a chance, or has not been given the opportunity, has not demanded the opportunity to establish a federal coast guard to control its own waters. The anti-piracy operations are being conducted mainly by Joint European Task Force, Navy ships, as well as the Puntland Maritime Police, which leads to problems between Puntland and the FGS, Federal Government of Somalia. We also see that like it or not, there are all kinds of issues that seem to crop up between Kenya and Somalia, including the role of Kenya in Jubaland outside of Amazon.
Yes.
In other words, the fact that Kenya greeted the re-election of the president of, yes, Madobe, at the same time as the FGS was questioning the credibility of that sub-state, that autonomous state. In the last week and a half, al-Shabaab has ramped up attacks in the Burundi sector of Somalia,
yes,
and has been essentially inflicting fair number of casualties on the Burundi troops.
Unlikely the AMISOM contingent.
The Burundi troops who are part and parcel of the AMISOM contingent, who have been there since 2007, 2008, when Uganda first entered the fray. And you know, the fact is, last week we also had a situation within Kenya where one of these Chinese armored personnel carriers was blown up by al-Shabaab, a platoon
yes,
of al-Shabaab soldiers who fired an RPG-7 at the APC, and at least 5 or 6 police, security force members were killed. So in fact, there's a lot going on in this region, which we know.
All right. But of course, you did mention the fact that the government also issued a statement regarding the armored personnel carriers afterwards that attack by the militant group. And equally, one person who has been under the spotlight regarding the purchasing of that has been the late Internal Security Minister, George Kaiseri, who appeared before the Parliamentary
Retired general
Committee.
in
Yes, retired
Kaiseri.
general.
You should have known
Prof,
better.
I'll come to you. Before we go to the, of course, the flip end of this entire issue, because there's also the pursuit or quest by Kenya to attain the now permanent position of the United Nations Security Council. Given the situation at the moment, yes, Kenya opts to do that. It said that there has been a memorandum of understanding in 2009, and that has been, of course, seen as a way forward to resolve the dispute. However, just weeks ago, the government of Kenya, Nairobi, issued a stopover of flights from Mogadishu in Wajir before coming or touching down at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Subsequently, then, Mogadishu said that all flights to Kismayo and from Kismayo should stop over at Aden Abdullah International Airport in Mogadishu before proceeding to Kismayo. How will this, again, sort of chalk and cheese argument diplomatically further deepen the already dilute situation on the maritime?
Excuse me. You see, this maritime thing appears to be a cooked-up thing.
By who? Are they interested parties?
Yes.
You at some point mentioned powerful European capitals.
Yes.
To be specific, which
those
countries in
ones.
Europe?
I think the Norwegians have an interest, the British have an interest, and to some extent the Americans have an interest. And see, you're talking about, Andrew was saying, should have done something 5 years ago. What is it that happened 5 years ago? You have these oil companies being created.
Yes, the shell companies.
Yeah, about 2013 or 2014, thereabout. And this federal government did not have problems with Kenya before that. So when these companies are created, and some of the directors are top British politicians or some other European politicians, then they have some of the directors, people who now are officially part of the federal government of Somalia. And a country that was seemingly bankrupt didn't have anything.
Yes, at the time there was no functional government.
There was nothing. And suddenly it had a lot of money and resources to run to the ICJ and say, oh, we want to put a case here.
And sue.
And sue. Yeah. You know, there was no serious attempt to discuss anything. It was just a rush. Let's go to ICJ. And so it was really not the Somali people who did this.
All right.
It is these other forces, because they have an interest in controlling not only the maritime resources, but also a bigger geopolitical power play. Because if they get away with what they are saying, the effect is essentially to landlock Kenya within a sea. You know,
all right.
That's one of some of the, it appears, the projected ramifications of this thing if it should go through.
All right. Suppose then, Prof, you have mentioned equally three important countries in Europe, that is Norway, the United Kingdom, and which other country did you mention?
I said even the Americans,
States.
they appear to be,
of course,
they
America
appear to have those
it's
things.
a superpower.
Yeah.
But given that, of course, you do teach history and the developments general across the world.
Yes.
In the event that your sort of assertion is, let's assume, is the fact on discussion at the moment. If so, why do these countries then, one time darlings of Kenya, want Kenya to be landlocked? And what's that interest that they want in terms of making this country a country with a sea landlocked? And why such a knee-jerk reaction to end a relationship they enjoyed previously?
See, when you have changes in the United Kingdom.
Because of Brexit?
No, this started before the Brexit.
Right.
When you have changes in the United States, then you have their interests expressed through NGOs, through companies, through whatever. Then you have, in recent times, these discussions about how to stop the Chinese from doing anything, how to do this and that and that. So there are a lot of forces at play. It's a geopolitical game. It's not just the fish.
Yes, of course.
And the oil. Of course, there is oil. There is oil and gas.
And she,
but
of course, said...
It's not just those things.
Yeah.
It is now you get into bigger political power play.
Yes, and she, of course, alluded to that. The minister, I quote her, that is Ambassador Monica Juma. She said that that is not even the point. The point is larger than that, I quote her. The first attribute that defines you as a country is your territorial integrity. Yes. The issue about what is there, whether fish or hydrocarbons or fish resources, is a secondary matter. This is about who we are, and infringement of our territorial integrity, the first infringement on the attribute of what defines the Republic of Kenya. She cited Article 1 of the Constitution.
You see, let me add that a little bit before Andrew picks in. In the 1960s and 70s, Somalia, the one that was active, had this redentist dream of grabbing what is Kenyan territory on land. So they have shifted now as induced and encouraged by external forces to advance that irredentism, not just on land which failed, now into the sea. And so
backed by foreign powers?
Yes.
Okay.
That is happening right now.
In the contemporary society?
Yes.
In the contemporary, 2019. Andrew, when the Prof does mention the issue about the United States coming in, Britain, of course, under David Cameron at the time, he, of course, has alluded to that. And, of course, Norway, one of the Nordic countries with, a well fat check in terms of the bank and its economy. When you take a look at that and the growing Chinese influence, of course, in 2018, President Xi Jinping did come to Africa in one of his 4 visits to countries, one in West Africa and then Rwanda and 2 other countries across the continent. Is it largely Kenya becoming sandwiched in the quest for global power and what I may put as the 21st century scramble and partition of Africa?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. In fact, you know, this court case was filed in 2014. Now, whether that was because there was a transitional federal government that was morphing into a federal government of Somalia, whether, you know, the Al-Shabaab had been pushed out of Mogadishu 3 years earlier, whether there was a lot more money sloshing around to lobby for to finance lawyers to go to put forth a territorial claim, which may or may not be justified. The fact is there are different ways of drawing lines in the ocean. And the Organization of African Unity, now the AU, which had reached an agreement among all the independent states not to try to fiddle with the colonial era boundaries, but those were the land boundaries. Nobody had really talked about the sea. And what we've seen in West Africa and elsewhere is a similar line drawn between Cameroon, Nigeria, and then Nigeria and Cape Verde. You know, these joint maritime economic zones to be exploited make a lot of sense. The thing about Kenya is that Kenya has legitimate strategic, economic, and political interests in the greater Horn of Africa. And Kenya's interests are not necessarily subservient to those of the United States at all. But what Kenya doesn't do is it doesn't put forth its policies very clearly and forthrightly and consistently. In other words, there's always this search for enemies.
All right.
There's always somebody looking for the outside hand that seems to be somehow denying Kenya its sovereignty. You know, if you look at the defense white paper that was issued at the beginning of May 2017, you will see that the government of Kenya put forth its international boundary the same way it's saying at the ICJ, which is just straight out into the Indian Ocean, as if it was a done deal, in an official defense white paper. Now, which basically guides your defense procurement, your strategy, and your naval procurement, and may be the reason why we now have a new Coast Guard, even though we have a perfectly serviceable Navy in Kenya. So I think that the point is that in September of 2016, the former Attorney General, Githu Muigai, was up in Paris arguing before the ICJ, and I was interviewed then from Paris on AFP about what is a solution. And because Kenya has had a functioning government since 1963, which is very rare in this region, this is not usual, that Kenya is the big brother, and as the economic so-called powerhouse of the region, should be taking the lead. Right now, if the federal government of Somalia were to win at the ICJ, first of all, other than auctioning blocks to companies that are going to buy those rights.
Nothing more than substantial.
Simply to sell them on to other companies, which is what happens in the international oil gas business. It's like you prospect and then you sell your stake to somebody else. You get your money out. But the FGS doesn't have the landward infrastructure because of the security situation. It has no control over its coast. It has no control over its maritime zone. So essentially, it cannot exploit, it can't even exploit the existing fishing resources, which are in fact massive. And you have Chinese factory ships, Spanish factory ships vacuuming up all the fish. But Kenya needs, I think, needs to be very proactive about the need to develop a joint economic commission to actually exploit the zone for the benefit of Kenyans and Somalia.
Okay, I haven't mentioned that. Prof, let me come to you then. This is what the minister said last week when, of course, she spoke to the press here in Nairobi. Our preference is on this type of settlement, which also, by the way, the preferred framework by the United Nations, the AU, IGAD, that is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, because it has the greatest guarantee for ensuring a peaceful conclusion on the matter. Again, what is at stake here is posing this question to you about whether Nairobi, the government, has realized the degree of ambiguity, say, in the event the ICJ rules on this matter, whether on the negative or on the positive, because equally the South China Sea, contested by China, Malaysia, Vietnam, and 6 other countries, there is still the dispute over who owns the waters. Is perhaps the coming together of President Farmajo and President Uhuru Kenyatta one that will not only gain or resolve the dispute matter, but equally continue the gains against Al-Shabaab, the AMISOM continuity in Somalia, and equally a strong and stable Somalia in the Horn of Africa region?
If it's possible for Farmajo and President Uhuru Kenyatta to come together and discuss about how they can jointly exploit the resources in that zone. And Somalia has a very, one of the longest coastlines.
More than 3,000
so why come into the Lamu area?
100,000 kilometers.
It's a strange thing. So that's why. It's actually, the issue here is not Somalia. As Andrew has just said, Somalia has no capacity to do these things.
There's a foreign hand in the matter.
No, these are foreigners. And that's why the issue is bigger than Somalia. So Farmajo is an American, and his cabinet.
He his American citizenship.
Donald Trump has not accepted that.
No, he renounced his citizenship. When you renounce your citizenship, it gets pretty clear.
So anyway, we don't go to get into those technicalities. You have a cabinet full of Europeans.
And members of parliament who are like Europeans and Americans.
In Somali skins. But so, whose interest are they propagating there? It's not the Somali. Now, from 1963...
years after independence.
Yeah, when Kenya became independent and when Somali became independent in 1960, a joint union of British and Italian Somaliland, there was no debate as to how the coastline goes. Huh?
Yes.
And I think there are records about operations. Kenya operating with its small navy, bigger than other neighborhood navies. That zone is Kenyan zone. It's part of the sovereignty issue you are raising.
Yes.
It's not so much about the fishing. Who has the sovereign right to that area? And Kenya has it. That's the issue. When in 1964, the OAU,
Yes, the Organization of African Union.
yes, in Cairo, meeting in Cairo, they said, let's not tinker with these things, for the sake of safety and peace and stability. It was the agreed thing.
All right.
At that time, the conceptions, you ask anybody, how is the maritime border? It was straight. When we dealt with Tanzania, and because there are all
There
these...
was an initial case with Tanzania.
Yes, agreed, it's a straight line.
That is east of the coast.
Yes, it's a straight line. What happened, if I may add a little bit.
Yes, briefly.
Why 2013 and not
But
before?
2014, that was when...
Yeah, 2013, 2014.
Yes.
2013, what happened? Kenya had an election.
That was March 4.
Yeah?
March 4 election.
Yes, there was an election in which some of these Western powers did not want Uhuru Kenyatta to win.
That was when the choices have consequences.
Yeah, Johnny Carson is
Yes.
the one who was talking about choices
Have
having
consequences.
consequences. If you vote, and you had some British High Commissioner here
Yes, at the time.
talking very rudely that if you don't vote the way you want,
Yes.
the essential contacts, that kind of things, strange things like that. Now, the Kenyans ignored that warning or advice, and they voted for Uhuru.
Yes. So are they punished for making a choice, a democratic choice?
Yes, that's what's happening.
All right.
So you see the same people who did not want Uhuru elected.
Yes.
So one of the ways of fixing Kenyans for not listening to dictates from the West is now engineer something from somewhere else. That's why then it comes in 2014.
Yeah, that is
Suddenly, the powerful people in the British power politics create a company somehow with very strange things,
Right.
and then suddenly the same thing, they are running to ICJ, which they control. So the ICJ itself is not as independent
Okay.
as some
Because
people would like
China
it to
did
be.
decry that.
Yeah, so the ICJ gives advisory opinions. And that's why you can take it as an advisory, and you don't have to accept it.
As China did.
Yeah,
On
you don't
this
have to
how-
accept
on
it.
this how China-
And there is a record that the way some of the ICJ decides things, judges and all those things. If you have judges from your country and your country is in, the judges will vote your way.
Okay. That is, of course, the attribution to Judge Yusuf.
Yeah, yes, and then there's some of those judges, they are connected with some of the countries with oil interests.
Yes, that you mentioned.
So,
the powerful
so
European capitals.
let's not play games here. Yeah?
Okay.
Let's put it. The issue is not Kenya and Somalia. It's Kenya and those forces that are trying to manipulate Somalia.
Okay. In a short while then, let me just seek your brief response here. A yes or no is that, of course, at many given point, ever since, say, after the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union, the war on terror campaign that started in 2001, the West has seen Kenya's strategic partner who was at the hub. Perhaps they waged the war on terror. Now there seems to be the emergence of Ethiopia, say Burundi, Djibouti, which acts as a power base for America, China, and of course Russia in terms of having military bases there. Is the appetite over on the end of the West now that they want a change in the regional hegemony?
The Kenya has been a favorite of some people in the West.
Not all?
Not all. And Ethiopia was also very important during the Cold War, especially during Haile Selassie's time. It had that privilege. And so they've been fluctuating. But Kenya has repeatedly stood out as being a friend of the West by choice. When all the others were claiming to be socialistic and all those things.
All right.
When all the others did not want to be associated with Israel
Yes.
and with the United States, Kenya was there. So it appeared to be that way.
All right.
But there's also that other side that Kenya has desired over time to make up its mind on what is Kenya's interest and not to be told
All right.
by some other people what it is. Now, as for the Cold War, yes, it has its fact. But we have had differences. And what we have now, as of the new constitution, after 2007,
Yes.
we have had serious frictions with the Western powers mainly because Kenya has refused to receive dictates, a lot of dictates.
Yes.
And because of that, you are told you will be punished, not once,
Yes.
but repeatedly.
All right.
And part of that punishment is what happened in 2014.
All right. Can I, Madam Director, are we going on a break? Yes, yes, okay. Andrew, I'll come to you. Seek your sentiments on that. And then shift my attention, our attention, their attention on, of course, the ongoing United Nations Summit in New York, the capital, that is the headquarters of the United Nations. But equally an important point, though, Kenya will be lobbying for the non-permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. Juma said that they will cut on the 400 million Kenya shillings spent to seek the AU Commission chairperson post in 2017 in Addis Ababa, in which CS then Ambassador Amina Mohamed lost to Musa Mahamat Faki, who's currently serving as the chairperson of the AU. That again will be coupling it up with the foreign policy point of Kenya and how they can do that now that we have won on the African front. This is News Compass. 40920 is the short SMS code. The hashtag on Twitter is News Compass. Stay tuned. We are coming back after the short break. All right, thank you. Welcome back. You're watching the program, and this is, of course, News Compass. Want to sample some of your tweet here. We are still with Professor Macharia Munene and Andrew Franklin regarding, of course, developments in the region. And we now shift our attention to the developments that is across the region, which pertains, of course, the quest for the non-permanent position of the United Nations Security Council. And it does, of course, pertain what is happening. And we'll be getting to some of your feedback later here on the program. And to just sample some briefly, Isabella says the telecom war has the potential to hamper peaceful resolution of the dispute and escalate the security situation in the region. The hashtag is News Compass. Sasha Wanjiku says the main driver of the dispute, which is now being heard at the ICJ Justice in The Hague, is the potential hydrocarbon deposits and contested area. Of course, the CS said it goes beyond that. Colin Socheng says, I wonder why neighbors are currently at loggerheads over the ownership of a narrow triangle that's about 100,000 square kilometers off the coast of East Africa in the Indian Ocean. Clinton Kitur says, in 2009, both countries agreed that the United Nations Commission in charge of mediating border disputes should determine the borderline once and for all. And this is Lemis final Kogei K. Sam on Twitter says, in the preliminary round in which Kenya lost its objection to the court's jurisdiction, Nairobi was represented by a team of foreign lawyers hired by then Attorney General Githu Muigai. So keep them coming. We'll continue to sample some of them, of course, in the due course of the program here on News Compass. I'll come to you, Andrew. This, of course, pertains the old quest and pursuit by Kenya to attain the non-permanent position of the United Nations Security Council. But allow me to pose it from this perspective, because there equally is the underneath hidden interest of the veto powers in the United Nations, the permanent members, China, the United States, UK, England, that is Russia and
France.
France. Apparently, France is a former colony of Djibouti. The United States and Russia and China have a military base in which they use the drone operations from in Djibouti. And Djibouti has said that it will take the campaign to New York City, and now the 74th General Assembly is underway in New York. Are we likely going to witness perhaps the tables turning in New York City of what transpired in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where Kenya won the first round?
Oh, no. Well, yes, actually, let me restate that. The Djibouti, which failed to accept the AU's vote, and proceeded, and then the next day said, we're continuing, just received the endorsement of the League of Arab States.
That is the Organization of Islamic Council.
There's that too.
About 59,
you see, actually, there's that too. But the Arabs, you see, Djibouti and Somalia historically have straddled the Islamic world, the Arab world, the African world, whatever suited their needs. And you know the thing, and I find, however, let me just. Something I found very disturbing about the notion about choices have consequences. The U.S. didn't want some certain people to win, and that Kenya has been getting penalized since 2013 for what the Kenyan people may or may not have voted for. I want to point out that in 2013, in fact, on this Saturday will be the 6th anniversary of Westgate.
21st September.
Yes, 6th anniversary of Westgate. Now, whatever our our being the U.S., I have a U.S. passport. I've been here for 38 years, former Marine Corps. The point is that whatever disquiet was felt in Washington and other Western capitals after March 4th, whatever hostility there may or may not have been towards President Kenyatta, all that just disappeared after Westgate. Now, as far as in my opinion, Kenya has had a free ride since 2012, when Obama's the man formerly in Juba, became the ambassador here, actually in 2011, Major General Gratian, who has very close contacts with the Kenyatta family, with General Karangi, dating back to the early 80s. Kenya has been seen as an important base for the United States war on terror, which is different from what Kenya should be pursuing to counter insurgency in its own 5 frontline counties, which has now become a homegrown insurgency, no longer dependent on al-Shabaab across the border. So, but you have to understand, Ambassador Godek, who arrived here after General Gratian resigned precipitately in June of 2012, he survived the August 7th, 1998 attack by Al-Qaeda. And he then shifted into counterterrorism within the State Department. That became his career. And so he came here intending to bring the war to the people who tried to kill him in 1998. And so, in fact, despite his lip service to anti-corruption, his lip service to a lot of things here, once the Constitution had been promulgated in 2010, which was an Obama administration project that did fit into the domestic needs, that it's almost as if Kenya, the United States took its eye off the ball here in so many ways. And as long as Kenya was a reliable ally in the war on in the global war on terror, to include reaching out to kill people in Yemen with drones. But now there's a situation where the International Court of Justice is the United Nations Court. And I think what we're seeing now is the government of Kenya, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is playing catch-up on the basis that if we lose the case, and then we say, well, the hell with that court. We don't accept it.
The court controlled by
Somalia, by the UN. Well, that's the end of any opportunity to get a non-permanent seat on the Security Council. And it's becoming, and it's also very difficult to see unless something very, very positive and salutary happens with Kenya, how Djibouti will lose its bid to be on the Security Council. Because you have China, which has a base.
France, a former colony.
The French, have a base, but the U.S. uses their base and pays them a lot of money for it. The fact is, there are different interests that seem more interested in Djibouti. And also, this leads us into this thing with the Muslim Brotherhood, the Sunni Shiite war, the Gulf states with their competition in the Horn of Africa between Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. And I think it's very important that but I don't accept the fact that Kenya is a victim. I don't see why Kenya, which has had peace and security, and stability, no civil war, no international war, no vast natural disaster since 1963, is unable to develop its own institutions to put forth its view.
Okay. Going away from that, of course, there are equally the other developments which are major, including, Prof, if you today read the papers on the Saudi-Iran standoff on the attack that happened at the biggest oil facility in the world. Iran saying it will not blink last in the event of a war or attack from US or Saudi, and that has continued over a while, and there is the perpetual sense of continuity. However, coming back home and the quest for the non-permanent position of the UN Security Council here, of what importance is it? Because the local man doesn't understand that. And is it perhaps a point with which Kenya wants to secure that, to shield off its interests, to cushion itself from these competing interests, say the Gulf, now spilling over to the East Coast and Horn of Africa region? We have these competing interests among China, London, and Washington, and we have seen Theresa May, Xi Jinping, all coming to the continent, including President Trump's invitation of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Is this a very crucial seat for Kenya to cushion itself, at least?
It is an important seat. I think Kenya has held it once before, something like that, back then, a long time ago. Every country aspires to have a chance.
The UN Security Council.
to be in the UN Security Council for the 2 years rotation. It gives one, it's a prestigious thing to do. Second, it gives the country opportunity to help shape global opinion on serious matters. So it's critical. In this, and there are those areas that are regional in thinking.
Yes.
So there are 10 non-permanent members, and then they are kind of distributed in an interesting way. Kenya has before given ways, conceded to another country to sit in that, in the name of solidarity, the African position. I think we considered it to Ethiopia before, so that it could be. So it has that value. But for Kenya and Africa, because in recent times Kenya has appeared to be the point country on what African interests are.
Yes, the point one.
The point man. And President Uhuru has articulated very well African concerns. And that's why most of the African countries this time are saying Kenya is the right one to be there to represent African interests and perceptions.
Okay.
So it's critical. Kenya is not doing that so because of this
maritime dispute.
No, that's not the main reason. This is a desire that was there for some time.
It's an entirely African...
It's an African thing.
Okay.
And of course, Kenya being one of the countries that helps, it's called, sometimes they call it, it's pivotal, regional, here and there. What happens in Kenya, a lot of other countries are interested in the region.
Yes.
Because it is the one that shows direction. So for the country that is often the campus, not the Morocco, the campus of the region, to be where it matters is very important. So Kenya desires that. Remember that when you are fighting, you are advancing particular positions, that's how we got the United Nations to establish its headquarters in Kenya on environmental matter.
Yes.
Because Kenya lobbied very hard and made very good arguments in the 1970s and competed with very powerful countries for that to come here. So it's a good lobbying position that Kenya desires. As for Djibouti, I would venture to, Andrew may not be very happy to hear this, but Djibouti is not Djibouti. Okay?
Again, foreign hands in it?
Yeah, they're the ones doing these things.
Okay.
Again, you can link it to that hostility that is associated with the events of the 2013, 2014. Now, when the AU held its vote, the first round, and Djibouti lost.
Yes.
Actually, Djibouti, it was reported, they said,
they
okay.
conceded.
Yes, it's okay. Then a day or two later, some others say, well, what are you doing?
We are not contented
You have
with
no
the
business agreeing to that. So it's not them. It is not the Djibouti. It is these other forces.
Okay.
The
foreign...
For the same reason,
yes.
they are engineering this case. The same reason. So they wanted to, hamstring Kenya. Hedge it in every way they can.
Yes.
And the UN seat is one of ways that they can do it. So we have to face this reality, that the hostility, particularly from some major powers, towards Kenya because of its tendency to be independent in the way it does things. Now, those layers, I agreed, Franklin, that they are, yes, they are those little cooperations, the small things that we have. But that does not put aside the big picture that is on operation at this level.
Yes, and the influence.
The influence. So you talk about Godek. He's a good man. Robert Godek was a good man. But Johnny Cassard was in Washington
at the time. All right.
Saying strange things.
Okay.
And William Bellamy was in Washington saying strange things.
He retired.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
he was here as ambassador before Rannenberger.
Yes,
Rannenberger
No, he went and became something big.
And of course, he fell out of love with members of parliament over the pay in the increment in their pay. A lot. But before I come to Andrew, the best interest of time, Prof, you raised an equally important issue because you again are tying up to the quest by Djibouti, the sort of unsatisfaction they did express on Kenya's first win at the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa on the foreign hand in it, perhaps stying the region. But I just wonder why foreign governments or powers are falling out of love with Kenya, the country they once considered the blue-eyed boy, especially in terms of democracy, human rights, and progress in terms of constitutionalism. And does it, again, take off all that once love that they showered upon him? Because equally, between 2013 and now, where that is your citation point, Britain, for instance, has had three prime ministers. The United States elected Donald Trump, and France had President, that is Francois Hollande. Now they have Emmanuel Macron. So why all this? Are these new regimes antagonistic of Kenya?
Well, you have to look at the perceptions of interest, permanent interest. And one thing you notice with master states, imperial powers, which behave like the global master states, and they think they have a right to tell everybody else in the world what to do. Okay. And if you don't agree with them, they become very angry. One U.S. president said, "You are either with us or you are not."
The terrorists.
Yeah, you know, it's not even in everything else. If you don't agree with them, they become very hostile. Because they ask, "Who are you?" Because small countries like Kenya are client states. And these are the master states. And masters usually don't want to be told that they are wrong, even when they are wrong. And that's what we have.
All right. Many things playing out, Andrew. But let me come at it from this perspective, or a general point. When in the 2017 we lost, Kenya lost, to that is Musa Faki Mahamat, and Ambassador Amina Mohammed, of course, was defeated. She was to assume the AU chairperson position of the African Union. What played out was the Francophone and the Anglophone issue. And Djibouti now seems to be soliciting the support of French colonized countries in western part of the continent. It has, of course, or she has, the Organization of Islamic Council, 56 member states, and is marshalling support in New York as we speak. Are we likely to witness a dynamics in the change of Djibouti in its quest, so as Kenya wanting a permanent position?
You know, first of all, the vote in the AU, I think, was 37 in favor of Kenya, 13 or 14 not in favor of Djibouti. You know, their memories are very long in many countries on this continent. And because of Kenya's ambivalent position, ambiguous position towards the apartheid government in Pretoria, its failure to cut transportation links, its covert trade links, its cooperation with South African intelligence services, in fact.
That was the Freddie Clark government.
No, this is actually dating back to 1980, 81, where there were South African citizens in the Kenya police. There were links between what was then Special Branch and Boss down in Pretoria. There was still a great amount of communications, covert trade and the like. Kenya gave lip service to the fight against apartheid. It was certainly not a collaborator in the way that Malawi was, where Malawi actually recognized or exchanged ambassadors with Pretoria. You know, when Mandela refused to get off an airplane here on a stopover because he was tired. No, he was not going to get off the airplane to shake hands with people who had been collaborating with the Pretoria government. The fact that Kenya only opened an ANC liaison office here in 1988, and then in 1992, when de Klerk visited to go to see his uncle's grave up in Eldoret, and the South Africans opened an interest section here, the ANC representatives lost their re-entry permits and were sent packing. So, you know, there are countries on this continent that do remember this. Now, the Francophone-Anglophone situation is no longer as pronounced as it was at the time of the Rwandan genocide, which I think was that almost epitomized the consequences for client states, where you did have French troops sitting in Rwanda holding back Paul Kagame's RPF, who had been fighting for 4 years, where the French apparently had advance notice of a pending genocide. Yes. But at the same time, the government of Kenya was trading heavily with the former Habyarimana's government.
That is
Kigali, who died
in the plane crash.
In the plane crash, that's right. So there's all through the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. In fact, you can trace the growth of major corruption in this country to when the French began to finance dams on seasonal rivers, when Mr. Biwa was the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Because the French were, in fact, had been running their own foreign policy in Africa anyway, from the end of colonialism, when they gave nominal independence to all their countries. Guinea got actual independence, and the French just destroyed all the infrastructure before they left. And it's hard to remember that this was going on during the Cold War, where the French were not cooperating with the U.S. or the Brits, where in fact France had left NATO when de Gaulle set up his own nuclear weapons, his force de frappe. But the notion that now Djibouti somehow is taking advantage of some Francophone influence is I think, is very minimal. If you look at the influence that China wants, China is playing a double game. China is financing the SGR and all these things
the pet projects
everywhere,
of Xi Jinping.
the Belt and Road Initiative. So China is playing a double game with Kenya. Doesn't seem to be supporting Kenya that much. But it wants its military base, which is part of its Belt and Road Initiative, in Djibouti. Djibouti is up to its rear end, it's past its rear end, up to its neck in debt to China, which then, of course, does have a problem for the U.S. The same reason why the U.S. will not is discouraging the United Kingdom from returning Diego Garcia to Mauritius, because Mauritius, despite being free enterprise, democracy, and all the good stuff, owes China a huge amount of money. And an agreement between the United States and Mauritius about the lease of this major, very strategic base in the Indian Ocean, at Diego Garcia, eventually Diego Garcia could be handed over to the Chinese, just as Sri Lanka handed over for 99 years a gigantic container port in the south of the island.
All right. Prof, I'll come to you in the, of course, as we head towards the last minutes of the program here, and we, of course, we understand the ongoing 74th United Nations General Assembly, that is UNGA, since its formation in 1945. But the minister did say that there are lessons that have been learned from 2017 in terms of the diplomatic shuttle, but failed to attain the AU chairperson position seat. They are cutting down on cost from 400 million to a possible 90 million Kenya shillings, according to CS Monica Juma. And when we look at that, and behind or underneath the script issued by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, are we likely to witness a change in perhaps the foreign policy position of Kenya and the crafting process perhaps to attain this all-important seat to Kenya to cushion itself?
I think there's been talk about redoubling the effort of lobbying. We apparently have not been very good lobbyists in some areas. But there is need to redouble the effort, not to turn around. Despite the obstacles in front, because we can see them,
Yes.
They're there. So that's all the more reason why there should be a redoubling of effort to convince as many countries in the world
as possible.
Yes, possible. Many of them in Africa, on Kenya's side, they have said that. Okay, many of them. But you need these other countries in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, despite our disagreements in some things. We need to lobby these to see the point and the value of Kenya being a member of the Security Council for the 2 years. Because it's a rotation office. And whoever wants it can lobby for it. But when we are competing with Djibouti, we know we are not competing with Djibouti, because Djibouti is not the problem. It's somebody else.
All right, Prof. and Andrew Franklin, our time has ended, so we need to end the program here on News Compass tonight, and I do thank you for coming, Professor Macharia Munene. He is a lecturer at the United States International University, Kenya, equally commentates on political, social, and economic developments in the region. So as Andrew Franklin, who is our president panel here on Mondays for the morning show New Day KE. And I do thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. A much expansive topic, but we have managed to pick the most important elements too. And thank you to you.
All right.
And thank you to you too for tuning in to program. Always here to bring you the best analysis when it comes to issues that develop in Kenya and, of course, beyond our borders. Thank you to the Able Director, Lizzie Kavat. Of course, next week will be something special, very massive. Gentlemen, Wycliffe, Shadrach, and Steve, I do thank you, the camera guys, who are making this program great. And thank you to you too. Always 3 ways to get in touch with us: on facebook.com/EbroTV Kenya. On Twitter, the hashtag is @EbroTV Kenya. Online, we are streaming live at www.ebro.co.ke. I am Ayub Abdikadir Abdi. We'll see you next week by the grace of God. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.